Welcome back to the Contributive Citizenship podcast. My name is Cynthia Nell and I am your host. In the previous episodes, we got to demystify the jargon surrounding how institutions, scholars, and language has shaped contributive citizenship. In today's episode, we zoom in on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or more commonly known as the SDGs. The SDGs are a universal call to action to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure prosperity for all by 2030. In conversation with Mpho Magwana, we look at how we can all apply the SDGs as part of contributing to society as contributive citizenship. Welcome to the Contributive Citizenship podcast. Hello, Mpho. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you, Cynthia. And how are you?
I am good. We're talking about the SDGs today and looking at the implementation and how Africa faces unique challenges. But maybe just as a charge to you, you could have chosen any sort of platform in as far as looking at the South African National Development Plan, other platforms, but why specifically the SDGs to look through the lens of contributive citizenship?
So the key thing to understand with the SDGs is that the SDGs are a byproduct of conversation. The SDGs evolved largely through the work of the United Nations, the division that shapes the agenda for the Conference of Parties year on year. But most critically, in business, which is where my contribution would have been, the SDGs came out of a number of fora. So if you look at, if I look back at the privileged opportunities I've had in the past to participate in the Davos dialogue, I've only ever been to Davos, I think, twice in my career so far. And what I saw and what I participated in is there's lots of round tables. So if you're a chair of a bank, there's a round table of chairs of banks and financial institutions. If you're a chair of a utility, there's that. If you're in manufacturing, there's a manufacturing circle. So at a global, starting with Africa as well, there's an African Business Association linked to the World Economic Forum. There's also, in that World Economic Forum, there's been the annual publication of the Global Competitiveness Report. The IMD, a business school in Lausanne, used to publish the Global Competitiveness Yearbook. And then thirdly, if you look at forums like the World Business Council on Sustainable Development, WCSD, World Business Council, WBCSSD, used to also participate as a non-party in giving inputs to the outputs of the COP, because the Conference of Parties, or the COP, is largely multi-government. So if non-government organizations like NGOs, business, are consulted, but they're not key to the negotiation table of whatever agreement that gets published. So all these facets found shape. Now remember, mostly in business, pre-SDGs, people used to talk about the triple bottom line, people, planet, prosperity. If you look at our code of governance by Professor Mervyn King, King 1, King 2, focused largely around governance, and King 2 spoke a little bit to the triple bottom line. And King 3 then started, in anticipating these outcomes of the World Business Council on Sustainable Development and many other fora, started talking about the various capitals, human capital, natural capital, social capital. And so most of the items defined under natural capital tend to capture a good number of the SDGs. Most issues that are defined under social capital tend to cover the human content side of the SDGs. And so it's important, therefore, to realize that it's a framework that has evolved over time. And so to that extent, there would be South Africans that also gave input in that, universities that would have given input. And when when I read up, there's names like Rogers Zliwayo, who's cited as one member of the panel, who's the economic advisor to the UNDP in South Africa, who apparently contributed to some of the thinking on SDG 1 and SDG 13, which is the one on no poverty and climate action. And I'm sure there'll be many others that in South Africa would have contributed to this. For if I look back to my work in the past at ESCOM, I came across people like Jane Mamat, who was a director at KPMG. I used to see her a lot contributing to these thought leadership platforms. There was a partner in South Africa at KPMG. His surname was Armstrong. I can't remember whether his first name was Neil or what, but his surname was Armstrong. He contributed hugely to the triple bottom line model, and then ultimately to the early phases just before the SDGs were published. He's a South African. Last time I was in touch with him, living in the UK. So there are many people who, through firms like those, contributed. There are many people as academics who contributed. And different thought leaders came forever. There's some renowned thought leaders that came from the Amazonian regions because of the fact that historically the most progressive thinking used to come from the Amazon until, again, oligarchs and kleptocrats disrupted. And now you started seeing heads of states becoming government leaders in the Amazon that want to mow down the trees rather than preserve them. So you will then see that from all these SDGs, because of how they evolved ground up globally, it becomes easy for people to then respond to the call to action.
Yeah.
And so in the spirit of contributive citizenship, one has to cherry pick, again, relative to your chosen field of contribution, where you wish to contribute. If you come from a social activist background, probably SDG 1 becomes a preoccupation. If you come from education, SDG, I think 4 becomes a preoccupation. And so the various, if you're a scientist in the climatology, you will find the requisite resonance in SDG 15, for instance. In banking, there's those about financial inclusion that people focus attention a lot on. So all these require an appreciation of, in my view, there's an enabling definition of diversity being about a collection of similarities and differences. So we've got different skill sets, different areas of passion, different chosen areas of contribution, and we've got certain common similarities. And so if you blend those together, everybody can find their way to which of the 17 to contribute to. In one organization that I used to chair, Nedbank, the 12 years I spent there, 8.5 was as chair of the, or perhaps 8, was as chair of the ESG committee, social ethics committee. And we used to apply the SDGs in the context of taking, for instance, the CFO used to have to contribute on the developmental SDGs on, say, water security, rather than just say, because you're the CFO, you can contribute to the financial inclusion. And vice versa, you would take the head of human capital and make them go and champion a task team on financial inclusion. And we found that way you get to, back to the diversity being collection of similarities and differences. You get to have people's skill sets cross-pollinating, getting to know about a different field relative to their comfort zone. And that way you create an executive team that is fully conscious of how to lead and drive a business while being conscious of executing SDGs.
And you mentioned earlier, Ntate Makwana, that the SDGs by their nature are very iterative and constantly evolving. And I want to just cherry pick a few. I know there are 17, they're quite a lot, but I think they're very salient ones that speak to us as Africans. The first one being SDG 1, no poverty. And we see poverty as a stubborn fixture in our communities that we interact with daily. What can we do differently as contributive citizens to reduce and ultimately eradicate poverty?
It's a big, big challenge. And my response to this always is, let's borrow from the African adage that you can only eat an elephant in small chunks. So the thrust of the SDG is let no one be left behind.
Correct.
So in my humble perspective, from a contributive citizenship point of view, we have a lot to learn, for instance, from the street committees that we had in the anti-apartheid era. Perhaps let's start street committees on how we make sure, in the spirit of brightening the corner where you are, let's start street committees so that there's a street committee on SDG 1 in every society. Because then it means in that block of streets, there will be someone who says, in our block of streets, maybe let's do a collective gardening project so that everybody has got, because not everybody has got space in their yard. Maybe there's a common area where we can plant spinach and plant beetroot and whatever. Because then if those happen, all you have to do is go to the ward councillor to ask for, we're already doing it for ourselves, so what can government do to complement what we're doing? Rather than just to say, government, please give, government, please do. You know, ask not what your government can do for you, but ask what you can do for your society. So if we started there in street blocks, the street blocks become a section of a society, of a township. A section becomes a district. The district becomes a region, a province. Then in my view, we could find that, again, as we learned from anti-apartheid movement, we can create a movement for growth and development. Similarly, in education, and again, things like education can be virtual. I'm going to sound like I'm overemphasizing the importance of the WW, but if each area had a champion, I mean, you know, I learned this when I was a non-executive director and partner, shareholder partner at Monitor Group, one of the global strategy firms, which is now today Deloitte Monitor. In the year that President Obama assumed office, some of the people that actually helped him with this assumption of office strategy came from Monitor Group. One of them, notably, the Fuller, one of the Fuller brothers, Mark Fuller, who was, among others, a protege of Professor Michael Porter, that wrote The Competitive Advantage of Nations. Monitor Group went to the Obama team and proposed that there be created a platform called AmericaForward.org. And America Forward then became a platform where CEOs and heads of influential philanthropic institutions would channel energy to create, even today, if you look at AmericaForward.org, you'll see that there's aspects of education, there's aspects of health, and a whole host of profit and non-profit. So imagine if we all lived in Soweto. Let's pick on Soweto, it's an easy example. And there was something called SowetoForward.org, just to belabor the example. And under Soweto.org, Soweto Forward, taking SowetoForward.org, you had taking MaBetlaForward.org, taking ShaweloForward.org, taking Orlando, taking Dube, taking this. It means people then would find that there would be a cascade of a non-governmental, just a civil movement where people contribute ideas on how to take things forward. The other platform that we have that I think is underutilized, Brand South Africa has a platform called Play Your Part. If all figured out how to play our part relative to the 17 SDGs, and Brand South Africa would create a platform then for all of us as South Africans, because it's a platform meant for all of South Africa. If they then create a platform where there's a Play Your Part for SDG 1, SDG up to SDG 17, they may just find that they may then create a formula of mobilizing the entire nation around the 17 SDGs. But right now, if you look at Play Your Part, and I'm not being critical or overly negative, but it's the truth, you will look that it tends to be celebrity, personality driven. in terms of the things that get flagged under play your part, rather than the substantive aspects similar to the SDGs.
You know, Dr. Makwana, you've touched on SDG 2 and a bit on 4 as well, which is quality education. But for all of these to be attained, we also have to be in good health and well-being. And if we look at SDG 3, which is exactly that, good health and well-being, we see the likes of mental health, wellness being to the fore of what a holistic human being should be and a contributive citizen should be. From a personal standpoint, what does mental health mean to you? And why do you think it's important for overall well-being?
So that's why in my 7 dimensions of contributive citizenship, I start with dimension 1, which is how do I show up? And there's a quotation, I forget who it is ascribed to, that says, comparison robs us of our happiness. The issue is not to compare yourself to another. The issue is as you define yourself as who you are as an individual relative to your life purpose under contributive citizenship, let's call it CC dimension 1, is that you must be clear as to what is it that you bring that is unique in you to the universe. Define yourself in line with your uniqueness. All of us are extraordinary, are not ordinary. We came bearing gifts as we arrived into the earth at birth, and therefore seek to unearth those gifts that you came to share with us, rather than to copy the next person. Yes, there are mental health issues that are inflicted outside in onto a person. It could be how you were raised as a child. You know, they say if you, as a parent, you must be careful because there's a Tswana expression that says, and words once spoken, they manifest.
Can't take them back.
So you can't, even you say to them, I take it back, it's already landed. So if you as a parent, in terms of contributive citizenship dimension 2, if every time when you need to administer discipline on your children, you start by saying, this useless child, you've already defined their mental wellness because you've already told them they are useless. And doesn't matter how much you're going to try to undo that, it has landed. There's an author called Brandon Bass who wrote a book called The Journey, which I encourage a lot of people to read that are dealing with issues of self, where she shows you how to, as a person who now have this pain inflicted on you, how to figure out how to, through meditation, go back to that moment. So in her case, she wrote the book because she had a tumor the size of a baseball in her stomach, which she self-healed from. She's still alive today. She's still running programs on the theme of the journey. So she shares in a chapter how she realized unwittingly, just through meditation and asking for the greater forces of the universe to help her, she went to a scene through meditation on a beach to where she was a young toddler. It was a family vacation, and her father rebuked her using similar words that I used earlier, of how useless and whatever else she was. And that hurt locked itself, because cancer often is hurt that locks itself in the organ that has the cancer in the body. And lots of authors, lots of practitioners have shown that once you learn to forgive and release that, hence people came up with this notion of cancer can be beaten. So she beat cancer that showed in her stomach as a tumor the size of a baseball. And she says fundamentally it was about, ironically, she starts first by saying she had to ask, who am I? Life purpose, why am I here on earth? She then had to, from there, say, what are the things that have triggered negative experiences relative to who am I? And she started going to those scenes. And her father had already passed when she was doing this. She was in her mid-40s. Her father passed earlier. She went meditatively to that scene and spoke to her father and said, you know that day when you said this, me, you don't know how much hurt you inflicted on me. Even though I can't touch your flesh now, wherever you are in the spiritual realm, wherever you are, I just want you to know that I forgive you. And I'm releasing myself from that hurt. And she started realizing this baseball becoming smaller and smaller. And remember, the oncologist that told her she's got few months left to live.
Sure.
So we have the power within. And here I must take you back to the earlier episodes when we spoke about spirituality. In my faith, this very technique lies in Isaiah 59. It also lies in another scripture in the New Testament, where it says, don't you know that your body is a temple of God? And that if you defile it, God will defile you. If you keep it holy, God will prosper you. And so we need to understand that the power of God is based on an internal locus of control. The power is within. Often in conventional faiths, we're led to believe that the power of God rests somewhere in the seventh sky called heaven. And so it is out of reach. Whereas St. Paul in the New Testament, when he was put to trial perhaps by senior Jewish Orthodox people saying, you keep on telling us of the Christ, you know nothing about the Christ, you were not among the 12 disciples. And he responds to them by saying, hang on, let me tell you. You talk about the Christ with whom you used to hang out as being one of the 5,000 followers, the initial 5,000 followers of Christ. I'm talking about the Christ that dwells in me. The prime mover is him. Even the formulation of words by my tongue is through him. And so when you understand that internal locus of power, you will find that a lot of problems can be solved from within.
Yeah, the power lies within. And I think a part of that is also acknowledging the fact that you're part of a greater scheme. It's not just about you. And it ties in again to contributive citizenship. In South Africa and globally, we see this tug of war between patriarchy and feminism and sort of women wanting a more acute voice in global politics and different organizations. If we zone in on SDG 5, which is gender equality, why do you think gender equality is important for a healthy society? And how do we equitably support the empowerment of women and girls in our societies, but also enabling them to be contributive citizens?
So I'm going to sound a bit controversial firstly in my response. My sense is that we need to ask ourselves, do we want gender equity? Do we want gender parity? Do we want gender equality? Equality means we want to be the same. Men and women can't be the same. Different physiques, different biological structure. Do we want parity? Probably yes, we do, because parity is about ensuring that the enabling environment within, in this case, our chosen field of contribution must not favor one gender over the other. But most importantly, do we want equity? Yes. There's a diagram, I don't have it on me now because I don't want to waste time looking for it, on equity. It shows, it says, what is the difference between equality and equity? So equality, I don't know if I will probably send it later to the podcast folks to include it in our images, but it shows a short person, tall person, a medium-height person looking over a picket fence.
Oh, yes, I've seen that, yes.
And the short person is trying to look over the fence, and the tall one is just enjoying. It's like there's a sport event, and then it then comes again and says equity. The other one is given a box relative to their height, not just an ordinary box, to make sure they can have the same viewpoint as the tall one. And similarly, the one who's medium height gets given a box their height to create almost a flat line of visibility. For me, that's what we should be working on. And what do I mean by this is that if I look back to the lessons learned in the 90s when I was a champion of transformation in the Black Management Forum, we used to argue, and for me, that argument has carried me throughout my career as an ESG champion, as a social ethics champion on boards. It's that we used to argue that there's nothing fundamentally wrong with being Black. And there's nothing fundamentally wrong with being a woman. And there's nothing fundamentally wrong with being disabled. Transformation is not about changing the disabled person and making them abled, differently abled. It's not about changing the woman to change them into being as macho as their executive counterparts, and vice versa, not necessarily about softening the male to become feminine. Transformation is about changing, it's back to Mazrui's 7 functions of culture. It's about changing the systems, processes, procedures, and the environment that give you the culture that excludes women, that excludes Black people, that excludes disabled people, and that perpetuates privilege for the other races. And so we should constantly be saying, to create that sense of equity, what are the systems, procedures, processes that shape a culture that negate the equity? And in my view, then we'll see a better enabled environment for all. But most importantly, for the disadvantaged in terms of gender, to be able to find their fair field of play.
And I think it's an important one because those systems are the ones that perpetuate certain stereotypes, patriarchy, and also the limitations that people who are previously disadvantaged can't even get up or have a box that will lift them up. I want to jump to
and also I'll lean a little bit on Mazrui's 7 functions of culture, and also the systems of reward and privilege. In organizations, you should review your bonus system. If you're an organization that says you are serious about creating equity for all genders, and yet I'm a manager that shoot the lights out on all the technical performance indicators, but I'm not showing how I'm building an inclusive team, you still reward me with a healthy bonus, I'm not going to change my behavior. So there is a carrot stick. Neural linguistic programming teaches us that the brain works on 3 value systems. The left side of the brain is known as the pain-pleasure value system. So that is the carrot and stick mindset. A logical left brain mindset says, if you do this and do this and do this, there will be more zeros at the end of your paycheck. And that's what most corporates and organizations do. The right side of the brain is driven by a value system called positive mental attitude. And that says that if you create an enabling environment, a positive environment, if I'm an artist, I'll paint you the most beautiful picture. If I'm a lateral thinker, I'm a writer, I'll write you the most beautiful story because you've put me on this scenic view or on this whatever that inspires me. Or you've given me an office with a scenic view, it inspires me. But then the brain, in terms of neurolinguistic programming, which accommodates African values in comparison to classical psychology, is the middle part of the brain that has got a value system called focus, fulfillment, formula. And this is the area called being other person-centered. Being a practitioner of Ubuntu means you are other person-centered, rather than left brain, me, self-centered. And then the right brain is a little bit of me, we centered, but the center brain is other person centered.
Securing affordable and clean energy has been a job that you've carried out for the country as the former chairperson of Eskom, South Africa's national energy utility. If we look at SDG 7, affordable and clean energy, are you confident that we're doing the right things today to secure an energy abundant future for ourselves as well as the continent? We look at issues related to, load shedding, but also stabilization, but also there's a curtailment that's taking place. Are you confident that we're doing the right things collectively as contributive citizens?
So again, it boils firstly to the choice that every citizen makes. I've made a choice to make setting up an energy infrastructure fund to be my chosen field of contribution in that sector. And so the day that fund is up and running, which hopefully it's now a matter of months, we'll be able to fund unique energy projects that help catalyze that broad sense of access to greener energy in a meaningful way. So each individual, back to the example I had earlier of maybe play your part and street committee being turned into developmental committees. If in a certain street we see that in a certain street committee environment, we see that there's land here in a park, it's lying underutilized because our children maybe don't feel safe to go play there anymore. Why not convert that park into a small solar park? And then the people in that block of streets can tap into that solar panels. It may be 5 megawatts, maybe depending on the land size, or 2 megawatts. But boy, it will go a long way, because then you can have everybody saying your fair share. Of course, there's the risk of illegal connections, but we'll say your fair share is that maybe you are accessible to X kilowatt hour as per your allocation, which means maybe your geyser now can be heated by this solar energy, therefore it reduces your bill. Maybe, I guess in smaller communities, there's no pool pumps, whatever else that's consuming energy, here's your allocation. So imagine if we did that. It pains me when I see elderly people on TV saying, power is out again and my insulin is going to get damaged. So now the fridge can be on 24/7 because we've got community solar.
Yeah.
So we must start thinking more and more out of the ordinary, out of the box, but leveraging old models that help us bring down apartheid. Let's use some of those models and dust them off and see whether they can help us eradicate energy inequality, poverty. But remember, in South Africa also, we've got 86%, between 86 and 88% universal access to electricity, minus the illegal connections, just official access. Now, again, we're not yet where you can sell meaningfully to the grid. But those communities, the day you're able to sell to the grid, what they don't use can be sold, and that money can be channeled to other needs, the proceeds thereof. So I think we should start thinking more futuristic, more long-term, and more out of the ordinary. Because, again, if we let our reality, the problems we face in our reality, define our ongoing living reality, we won't change and ensure that we have a better life.
And it's up to us. I think sometimes you mentioned earlier that there's this sort of heavy reliance on the state and government must. But I think we can also galvanize around how we're contributing to society and making sure that our light's on and even our water's preserved. This is the Contributive Citizenship podcast, and we're in conversation with Mpho Magwana on the SDGs and looking at it through the lens of contributive citizenship. I want to jump again, Tate Magwana, to perhaps linking to large-scale utilities and look at SDG 9, industry, innovation, and infrastructure. How can countries build resilient infrastructure for sustainable growth? You've traveled extensively to the global south as well as the west and the north. Are there any country examples that you think South Africa can learn from in its efforts to industrialize but also minimize environmental impact?
I can think of many examples, but maybe we should again think out of the box and out of the ordinary. Imagine if we created a platform called Engineers for the Good of Society, .co.za or .org.za.
Yeah.
And everybody who's an engineer, who's got an idea on how we can purify our dams, our rivers that are now infested with sewage, our oceans that are infested in sewage, borrowing from case studies elsewhere. For instance, in my last visit to Stockholm, one of my hosts there who has established a smart solar company called What's to You, hopefully we'll bring it to South Africa. In that society, there's a big sort of river. If you think a river the size of Hartebees, and you imagine this city to be like that community of Hartebees. They have this ferry boat that ferries people from across one part of the river to another part of the city for work, for retail, for a whole host of things. And they realized that this river was just getting polluted and polluted as more people used this ferry. And there were other natural issues that also polluted the water. They then clapped together as engineers that specialize in water reticulation and water purification systems on how they could clean that big river. And they cleaned it up. the foul smell went away, and they continue to maintain it. So clean that people now have developed a sport of swimming in that river, equivalent to what we call the Ironman competition.
Yes.
So solutions are always there for us to implement, if only we look beyond the natural logic of the problem.
And even in problem solving, I think there's something to be said about how we are responsible in the way we consume certain goods, but also the production thereof. And again, linking me to SDG 12, responsible consumption as well as production. But this one is a difficult one, Tate Makwana, because it almost shines a spotlight on our own individual causes, right? Why do we consume the way we do? Is there an aspect of gluttony or responsibility relied on our behaviors? How do we practice responsible consumption in our daily lives, but also with the awareness again that we are also adding to society, not extracting from society? What strategies can we develop around, reducing waste, but also consumption?
I don't think we even need strategy. We just need to practice. The average shopping mall has got a recycle zone. It says you can throw bottles in here, you can throw paper in here, and so on. The average municipal service, at least in the neighborhoods that I'm associated with, they throw plastic bags when they come to collect the dustbin for recycle bags. So that in your refuse in the house, you can separate recyclables to non-recyclables. Little things like those. And again, it starts in the family and in the school. If in the family we start being more conscious, it starts with, you're in a family car, you're going on vacation, you're with small children, and they eat whatever they eat from little packages, and they say, Mommy, Daddy, where do I put this? And in the car, you've not put a travel refuse plastic bag or refuse bag. And then maybe the older sibling says, just open the window and throw it out. And you don't say, no, my child, we don't do that. And so what you learn early shapes how you become as an adult from a consciousness point of view. In classes, we must make sure that our public education schools have got as knowledgeable life orientation content as in the Ivy League schools. There's a remarkable difference between a child groomed in an Ivy League private education system versus public schooling. Because in there, by virtue of access to knowledge resources, they inculcate it early versus our public schooling. So we must make sure that our public schooling is on par and beyond in terms of environmental education. You drive behind a taxi, the next thing you know, once they finish that can or whatever, it's going to be flying out of the window. So if we made sure that school, community, street committee, whatever, play your part, we also have a clear campaign that conscientizes us on the basics of environmental responsibility. Therein lies the opportunity. You go to the beach, contributive citizen, President Paul Kagame, you can like him or not like him, he's good in that way, in having those cleanup Saturdays, because they observe Sunday as a day of worship. On Saturdays, he walks. There's various ways in which he and councillors and his political people walk the streets with bags and sticks to put rubbish into refuse bags. I don't see us doing that in South Africa. Maybe given that we're approaching an election, maybe the mayors should start campaigning like that.
Yeah, maybe.
Rather than hosting rallies and telling us vote for this, let's just...
And who has the biggest stadium?
Yeah, let's just have each councillor, mayor saying, I'm your incumbent mayor, meet me on X Square. We're going to clean up the city. We're going to clean up the location. We're going to clean up the village. Maybe suddenly by walking with people, doing something, they'll get more connected. Because I get the point sometimes we are removed from the reality on the ground as leaders.
And also the matter of demystifying certain concepts. COP29 has just wrapped up. And if we link it to SDG 13, climate action, governments, big multinationals and corporations were in the Middle East talking about this road to, net zero, but also climate action. I wonder what messaging as contributive citizenships, we can sort of proliferate around climate action. And in South Africa, JET, do you think the messaging around climate action is landing correctly in as far as our contribution to net zero or JET, the just energy transition?
My view, and it's just my view, is that the COP negotiations and the climate action and the potential agreements that come out of that are muddied up by kleptocracy. The fossil fuel kleptocrats that make money from coal and oil and gas are not going to easily relinquish their profit power to solar, wind, and other related green economy kleptocrats. They're sort of the emerging. So there are those kleptocrats that have seen the light of day, and they're funding public policy campaigns and they're funding political campaigns towards green economies. And there are those that do see the light of day but are reluctant because there's lots of financial value, profits and EBITDA and whatnot that gets harvested in the fossil fuel space. So that's the one part. The other part is the thing I feel in the midst of the powerful politicians and the powerful financiers or kleptocrats that fund these things. There's a constant amnesia, let me call it that, about the fact that this is called a JET, a just energy transition. The first world has got higher pollution or have achieved industrial development through higher pollution of fossil fuels. Instead of then saying, let's see what lessons we've learned in that and make sure we still help African economies and other emerging economies to industrialize, but with limited pollution, they then expect them to shut down whatever things that keep bread and butter and livelihoods on the table and simply become green overnight. It's not going to happen. Someone that benefited, and then you overlay that colonialism, where colonies, a lot of powerful colonies or colonial powers grew at the back of African raw material. They again forget that spirit of plowback is not there. They need to plow back to the emerging economies so that they can be a just energy transition.
And that just in that also means equality. It also means partnership. And in examining contributive citizenship, Mpho, you compare...
Let me interject and say it means equity.
Equity, yes.
Because equality means they're still going to expect the field of play to be the same. So if we imagine the short and the medium height, people being given a box relative to their height, South Africa's, for instance, just energy needs will be different to, for instance, Mali, to, for instance, Somalia or Nigeria. And so therefore each must be supported according to their level of readiness and according to their level of who gets left behind. Because there are risks. What we saw with the repurposing of Komati, for instance, is that under coal in the Komati power plant used to yield so many megawatts. And when you repurpose it into a renewable energy station, you reduce the output. You become green, of course, but you reduce the output. Is that what we want? To have green solutions and less output in an environment where we saw how devastating load shedding could be for people, for jobs, for livelihoods.
And then there's also the labor component, right? So the labor voice that's also coming to the fore. But I think, Mpho, you've compelled us to also actively reflect on how our actions, choices, and commitments align with the imperative mission of fostering a more sustainable world, but also coming into that space as contributive citizens. In analyzing the last SDG, SDG 17, I think because it emphasizes collaboration, partnerships for the goals, I want you to perhaps highlight for us in our spheres of influence. Yes, we can collaborate with each other, but how do we make sure that within the ethos of, contributive citizenship, what initiatives can we participate in? Is it just venturing into volunteering? Is it going into schools? How do we collaborate effectively? Yes, for the SDGs, but for a more inclusive and also contributive society.
One of the roles I fulfill in my chosen field of contribution is I'm a young professor at UNISA School of, it's called SAMS, College of Management Economics or Economic Management Sciences. And there recently I was quite pleased to see them introducing a number of master's programs for studying sustainability up to PhD level. But I think the SDGs and ESG must find them a way in the education curriculum. So either in life orientation or somewhere, from kindergarten all the way to matric, there should be, as we used to have geographical studies, we used to have a subject called home economics, which was only targeting young girls. We should find a way of having a subject that either is called environmental sustainability, environmental studies or something, so that you've got a cohort of a critical mass of young people that when they pass matric, at least there's a percentage of matriculants that in their major subjects, they've got something to do with studying the environment or knowing the environment. Because then at university, you'll have, again, a new field. If we look at what various reports tell us, certain fields of study are going to be redundant. So people who study geography end up being climatologists, some of them. So we need to more and more people understanding, becoming engineers that are passionate on water articulation. We need to have more and more chemical engineers figuring out how to help us produce more good but biodegradable materials. And again, helping us ensure that manufacturing cycles are more and more green. In my old industry, in the steel industry, I used to be chair of ArcelorMittal South Africa. And I've been watching various competitors, including ArcelorMittal itself, shifting away from steel that is made from fossil resources, iron ore, coking coal, and the rest, and starting to talk about green steel. And so if we have more and more of the steel makers thinking green steels, we'll have more and more cars made with green steel. So over and above, less emitting in terms of electric cars, but just the fabric, the material used in the car will become more green and green. And so in that sense, imagine if we got to a point where when you trade in a car, it's not just trading a car, but actually it's like recycling a car.
Yes, the parts, everything.
Then we're moving into a new realm of both manufacturing and green economy. And these are the trends of the future that policymakers, decision makers should become more mindful of. And as they make those policies that shape society, we should start thinking along those lines.
And I think it's so incumbent for us as we're coming into the fore to look at, yes, of course, the 7 dimensions and how we show up, but also in the same vein, the collective effort that's required in making sure that we contribute effectively. Thank you, Mpo. We've done a snapshot of the SDGs, but I'm going to be slightly indulgent and throw in a question. You know, it's often said that the role of the media is to showcase what people should be thinking about or not thinking about, whether critically or not. And through, again, the lens of contributive citizenship, what do you think the role of the media is in highlighting, sure, the SDGs, but the role that we have as citizens in playing a part in our democracy?
Firstly, I think to answer that question meaningfully, we must make peace with the reality. There's less and less independent media in South Africa. And there's less and less independent media globally. What I mean by this is there's more and more private sector ownership of media. And therefore, when you are owned by owners, shareholders that want to see quarter-to-quarter performance, that want to see numbers go up and up, and you want to attract advertising revenue consistently, chances are you're no longer always driven by the noble cause of media, which is the pursuit of truth, or truth well told, as some people would say. So we need to have again people who say my chosen path of contribution is to either publish my own articles on my area of passion in the World Wide Web, on social media, or to cause and create a new service area. It's now also possible to create a radio broadcaster, community broadcaster with subsidies from the state. And I think it will be good if we see, I'm not sure, I'm speaking under correction, I've not seen a community broadcast station that focuses on the environment. Maybe this time has come for someone to create a broadcasting platform that focuses on ESG and the green economy. There's lots of podcasts on it, but podcasts are not accessible to everybody. But if we could, and then we need to see more radio stations, in spite of them being non-independent and owned by capital, we need to see more and more of them having talk shows on the green economy. In other words, have a green specialist trained up on the technique of broadcasting and hosting talk shows. I mean, listening to radio and media, television can be very depressing because all they talk about is who got shot where, who. So if we could just break that monotony and have a talk show that comes at a reasonable hour that talks about investing in the green economy or shaping a better world through the green economy.
Thank you, Dr. Makwana. We've thrown down the gauntlet, and I think I'm taking it up. That's a wrap on today's episode of the Contributive Citizenship podcast with myself, Sintle. Join us on the next episode as we look at the triggers, connectors, and pressure points of contributive citizenship. Brought to you and authorized by Mpho Makwana.
No, sounds good. So we're going to run now until possibly 1:45.
Okay, 1:45.